They gathered at the edge of town like buzzards. The sun hadn't cleared the rooftops yet, but already the heat pressed down like judgment. In the auction yard behind the general store, dust swirled around boots and whispers. Men leaned on fence posts, arms crossed, hats pulled low, watching. She stood with her wrists tied, silent, unmoving, as if the ropes meant nothing. The sheriff's voice cracked above the crowd. Final order from Fort Breckenridge. Apache prisoners are to be transferred, sold off, or transported by month's end. There had been 7 of them, days ago, 6 gone now, claimed, bartered, relocated. She was the last. Nobody spoke her name. Maybe nobody knew it. They only knew she wasn't meant to be there. Not in this yard, not in this town. Her hair was long and black, tangled but proud, eyes sharp as obsidian, her skin marked by sun and sorrow. A woman not young, but not yet old, standing alone in a place that had no use for her. The sheriff cleared his throat, looking anywhere but at her. Lot 41. Female, age unknown, last remaining tribal. Quiet, strong, silence. Then, like a creak in a dry church, a voice rose. Not loud, not eager. I'll take her. Heads turned. Jedediah Cobb didn't repeat himself. He stood just outside the fence, arms at his sides, eyes shadowed beneath a weather-worn hat. Some men didn't even know he still lived out there. 30 miles west, past the dead cottonwoods, where the soil cracked and cougars screamed at night. Nobody said anything. They didn't laugh, didn't whisper, just watched him walk up, toss a folded paper into the sheriff's hand, and reach for the rope. The journey back to Cobb's land was long, silent, and harsh. He didn't ride a horse, just led the mule that carried supplies. She walked behind, untethered, matching his pace without question. He never looked back. She never lagged. Twice he paused to pour water into a tin cup. Each time he drank first, then left the rest balanced on a rock beside the trail. She drank without sound, eyes on the horizon, like she could still see something no one else could. By dusk, they arrived. A simple cabin, low-roofed and shaded by old pine, a barn half fallen in, a coop with no chickens. No dogs barked, no smoke rose, just a single chair on the porch and a bell that hadn't rung in years. He opened the door. She stepped inside. There were no locks, no instructions, just a glance and a space left open. The quiet that follows days passed. She spoke nothing, nor did he. She tended the hearth. He fixed the fence. She hauled water from the creek, quiet as a ghost. He mended tack and oiled the rifle he never used. They moved around each other like tides, never touching, never colliding. She didn't flinch when thunder rolled through one night. He heard her breath steady as rain hit the tin roof. In the morning, he found the woodpile stacked higher than before. She never entered his room. He never entered hers. Sometimes she'd pass him on the porch, eyes catching his just long enough to mean something, though neither could say what. Her gaze wasn't soft, wasn't kind, but it held weight, like stone under water, a kind of knowing that didn't need language. At dinner, they sat across a table built for 4. They ate in silence. But sometimes silence was heavier than speech. A month later, Jedediah came into town for nails. He passed through the saloon unnoticed, as usual, but when he stepped into the general store, 2 men fell silent. "You still got that woman?" one asked. Jed paused. "She's at the house." "That's no house for her," said the other, half smiling. "Ain't no place for anyone, really." Jed said nothing, just paid, turned, and left. Behind him, the storekeeper muttered, "Never said 10 words in 5 years, and now he's buying silence with rope and a fire." The words didn't reach him, but something else did. A cold glance from across the street, where a girl, maybe 16, stood beside a preacher and watched him like she'd heard stories about ghosts that walk in the sun. Back at the cabin, the woman had skinned a rabbit. Jed noticed the tracks leading to the trap he'd set, but never checked. She'd found it anyway. There was no fire started, but the meat was cleaned. He hung the rest of the nails in the shed. That night, he left a folded piece of leather on her table, old but good, from a saddlebag he'd kept too long. No word, no look. She wore it the next morning, a knife sheath at her side, empty. By week's end, a knife appeared there too. One she'd carved herself from an old file left in the barn. Nothing was ever spoken about the exchange, but the silence began to feel like language. One night, a storm came heavy and fast. Wind howled, tearing loose shutters. Jedediah stepped outside to tie the line down, only to find she was already there, hair soaked, arms wrapped in a shawl. Without a word, they worked side by side, roping the shutter, pulling the tools inside, hammering boards until the wind could do no more. When it passed, he sat on the porch, soaked to the bone, steam rising from his coat. She brought a cup of coffee, placed it beside him. Her fingers brushed the wood near his. Just that. No more. But neither moved for a long time. Weeks blurred into months. He never asked about her past. She never spoke of it. But some nights, he'd find her outside, staring west, toward the ridgeline, toward what was gone, toward what he could never understand. And in those moments, he wondered, did she hate him for what he did? Not for buying her, but for being the only one who did? Did she see him as a captor, or simply the last man foolish enough to raise his hand? He didn't know, and perhaps he didn't want to. Late in autumn, a rider came, not from town, not from the fort. He bore no badge, no letter, no reason, just a pale horse and a rifle on his back. Jed watched him from the porch as he tied the reins at the gate. "Looking for trade?" Jed asked. The man shook his head. "Looking for something stolen." Jed's hand didn't twitch, but his breath slowed. "She came with papers," he said. "Papers don't mean anything," said the man. "Not to her or me." Inside, the woman stood just past the curtain, still as stone. The rider's eyes caught hers, just a flicker. "Tell her," he said. "She doesn't owe the dead anything." Jed didn't answer. The rider turned and left, dust rising behind him like smoke. That night, she placed a pine branch above the door. Jed watched her do it, not out of curiosity, but reverence. He didn't ask what it meant, and she didn't explain. But that night, for the first time, Jed slept with the door unlatched. Not from trust, not from care, but because whatever bound them was no longer just silence. It was something deeper and far more dangerous. By winter's edge, their days had found rhythm. Jedediah rose before dawn. He chopped wood, fed the mule, and walked the perimeter of the property with slow, deliberate steps. She always followed, 5 paces behind, barefoot even in the frost. He never told her to. She never asked to. Some days, they wouldn't share more than a glance. Others, not even that. Yet, her presence became like the creek water. Always there, cold and clear. Necessary. Inside the cabin, she added things without permission. A coil of dry sage in the corner, strips of dried grass above the lintel, a circle of stones in the yard, where she sometimes sat at dusk and hummed low, broken tones. Not song, exactly. Something older. Jed never moved them, never spoke of them. But he noticed. He noticed everything. When snow finally came, it arrived angry and fast. A blizzard tore through the valley for 3 days, sealing the cabin in white. Jed had enough wood, enough meat, enough reason to stay inside. The cabin creaked like it remembered the storm that took his father. He'd built it strong, but time made everything soft eventually. Wood, resolve, memory. She sat by the fire, fingers working on something he couldn't see. He caught the movement once, from across the room. A piece of thread, knotted around bone, carving, weaving. A charm, maybe. He didn't ask, but she caught him watching, and for the first time, she smiled. Not full, not soft, but enough to twist something in his chest that had been knotted for years. On the 4th day, the storm broke. The world outside glared white. That morning, he found her in the barn, facing the open door. She didn't turn when he approached, just said, quietly, "Your name is Jedediah." He stopped in the straw. Her voice was smooth, no accent, no fear. "You never said it," she added, "but I heard them say it, in town, and you didn't correct them." He nodded once. "I had a name, too," she said, "but you will not say it." He didn't. She turned to face him. "If you say it, it dies." Jed looked at her. The wind stirred her hair like shadow. "I won't," he said, and that was all they said that day. Tracks came 3 nights later. Boots, wide, deep, fresh. 3 sets, coming from the east ridge, skirting the outer fence. Watching. He saw them before she did, but she followed the line of his gaze and went still. He waited for her to speak. She didn't. Just disappeared into the trees for an hour, then returned with a branch dipped in ash. She scraped symbols in the snow. Careful, precise. One by the gate, one by the woodpile, one near the coop, long since empty. That night, neither of them slept. They sat on opposite sides of the hearth, firelight painting the ceiling with flickers. Outside, wind howled like it knew names neither of them spoke anymore. By morning, the tracks had returned. This time, only one. Jed stood on the porch with the rifle across his knees. She stood behind the window, arms folded. The man came slow, on foot, hands visible, wearing a long coat the color of creek mud. He stopped 20 feet from the door. "You got something belongs to someone else," the man said. Jed said nothing. The man took a slow step forward. "That Apache? She wasn't yours to take. Fort says she vanished. Governor's looking. Preacher, too." Jed's jaw moved once. "I didn't take her. I paid." "Don't make you right," the man said. "She's a loose thread. Threads cause snags." From behind the curtain, her eyes locked on the man's boots. Jed raised the rifle, just a hair. "This land don't want more graves." The man smiled. "Then don't dig one." He turned and walked away, not looking back once. That night, they spoke more than ever, yet still said almost nothing. He sat at the table. She stood by the door. "More'll come," he said. She nodded. "I don't want blood here." Another nod. He looked up at her. "You want to go?" A long pause, then a slow shake of her head, but her eyes didn't meet his. He wanted to ask why. Instead, he said, "There's a trail west. Hard to follow. It'll get you past the river." Still, she didn't look at him, just walked to the fire, dropped a bundle of sage in the coals. The smoke rose slow, straight. "I know the way," she said at last. Jed didn't sleep that night. He didn't know if she did. The next week, 3 horses came at dusk. Not townsfolk, not law, scouts, Apache. Painted, silent. She saw them first, standing in the barn's shadow, eyes glowing like amber. Jed stepped outside, but she stopped him with a hand. "No words," she said. "Let me." She walked barefoot across frozen dirt. The 3 watched her. One spoke in a tongue Jed couldn't follow, smooth and sharp like water over bone. She answered. More words. Fast, clipped. Then a long pause. Finally, One of them handed her a feather, black with a red tip. She touched it to her forehead. They turned and left without another glance. She returned without expression, just the feather in her hand. Jed asked nothing. But that night he watched her wrap the feather in twine and hang it over the door, and he slept a little easier. They were no longer strangers, but not companions either. Something else lived between them now, like a path through tall grass that neither dared trample fully. She began humming again, always when she thought he wasn't listening. He caught fragments, a lullaby maybe, or a warning. He'd begun leaving little things on her table, a pair of old gloves, a scrap of oiled cloth. One day, a book of pressed flowers, his mother's, long buried in a drawer. She never thanked him, but she never returned them either. And when spring finally came, she planted seeds behind the cabin, in a place where nothing had grown for years. The first letter in 5 years arrived in April, carried by a boy on a bay pony. Unmarked envelope. No seal. Jed read it once, face unreadable, then burned it. She watched him do it. "Someone coming?" she asked. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not." He didn't tell her what it said. He didn't need to. The next morning, she sharpened her knife and hung another charm on the barn door, a triangle made of thorn branches. That evening, they sat on the porch. The wind was warm again. Coyotes howled far off. She didn't hum. He didn't speak. But their hands rested on opposite sides of the bench, close, not touching. And when the wind shifted, carrying the scent of something burning in the far valley, they didn't flinch. Whatever was coming, they'd meet it side by side, but not hand in hand. Never hand in hand. In May, the birds stopped singing. The wind still blew, the earth still shifted, but the canyon paused, as if something waited just beyond the ridge, unseen, but certain. Jedediah Cobb felt it in his bones, that slow tightening in the back of the neck, the kind of stillness that came before a gunshot, or a flood. She felt it too. She said nothing, but stopped going to the creek alone. Stopped humming. Stopped leaving her knife behind. Even the mule seemed nervous, shifting in the barn at night, nostrils wide. Whatever was coming, it wasn't new. It was old. Old enough to know her by name. He came on a Tuesday, middle of the day, riding a fine black horse and wearing a coat that had never known dust. He didn't stop at the gate, just rode right up to the porch like he'd been there before. Jed sat in his chair, hat low. The man dismounted without a word, looked at Jed, then past him, to the door. "You're harboring government property," he said flatly. Jed's voice was gravel. "She ain't property. She was surrendered to the fort as a prisoner, then reassigned by official order. You interfered." Jed stood, slowly. The man didn't flinch. "You don't have to believe in law, Cobb, but law still believes in itself." Behind the window, her shadow shifted, silent. The man looked toward her, voice low and cold. "Her people are gone. She belongs nowhere." Jed said, "Then why does she bother you?" The man smirked. "Because you made her someone." He left without waiting for a response, but something heavy stayed behind. That night, she scratched new symbols into the frame of the door, 2 crossed lines, then a curved mark beneath. He watched her, arms crossed. "Warning?" he asked. She didn't answer, just pressed her palm against the wood and closed her eyes. Jed stepped beside her. For a second, their arms touched. She opened her eyes. Some things don't leave unless you tell them to. Later that week, she led him to a place he hadn't walked in years. Up the hill past the dead cottonwoods, where the earth turned red and loose. There, at the foot of a twisted mesquite, sat 6 small stones, carefully placed. Old dot faded. She added a 7th. Jed looked at her. Family? She didn't answer. Instead, she took a braid of her own hair, tied it with thread, and laid it beside the last stone. No tears, no prayer. Just the wind, and her back turned to him. And that told him more than any words could. June came like fire. The heat cracked the soil and stole breath from the wind. The sky turned white at noon, and nothing moved except flies and shadows. Jed fell behind on repairs. The roof sagged. The well dipped lower. Still, she moved without complaint. Her hands roughened, her face grew lean, but she never asked for less. One morning, he found her collapsed outside the coop, sun in her eyes, blood on her palm from a nail she hadn't seen. He lifted her without a word, carried her inside, and cleaned the wound in silence. She didn't thank him, but her fingers curled around his wrist before he stepped away. Just once. Then let go. In late June, smoke appeared in the north, black and thin, a signal, or maybe a warning, too far for flames, but close enough to smell. That night, she stood outside long after dark. Jed joined her. You know who it is? He asked. She nodded. Not who. What? He waited. She looked at him. I was taken from the Chiricahua, but not all of them died. Some became something else. Raiders? No, she said. Ghosts that wear skin. He didn't ask again. The man with the clean coat came back. This time with 2 others. Soldiers, by the look of them. Rough faces, heavy boots. They came early, before the sun could dry the sweat off Jed's brow. This is your last warning, the man said. We come back with a warrant next time. You'll lose the land, too. Jed didn't look at him, just watched the dirt. She stood behind the door, listening. We'll give you 1 week, the man said. After that, no more chances. Then they left, and the sun felt hotter than it had all summer. That evening, he asked her, Do you want to run? She looked at him for a long time, then shook her head. They'll follow, she said. No matter where. I can fight, he said quietly. She didn't smile. You'll die. He didn't argue, just looked out at the fence line, where the posts leaned like tired men. I lived alone for years, he said. Didn't think I'd ever need to stay for anyone. You still don't, she said. But neither of them moved, and neither of them left. 3 nights later, the wind shifted again. But this time it carried drums. Not loud, not rhythmic. Just there. Jed sat up in bed. She was already at the window, watching the dark trees. He joined her. They're here? He asked. She nodded. But not for me. What then? Her voice was soft. For something I carry. Jed didn't ask what. She wouldn't have answered. At dawn, the trees fell silent again. No birds, no wind, just stillness. They stood side by side on the porch, eyes fixed to the east. In the distance, 3 riders appeared, not soldiers, and not alive. Ghosts wearing skin, the kind that remember names and debts. She stepped forward, knife at her side, jaw set. Jed reached for his rifle. Their hands didn't touch, but their shadows fell as one. The riders didn't stop at the fence. They passed through it, like it wasn't there, like nothing made by men could hold them. 3 figures, no colors, no emblems, only dust-caked skin, cloth hanging in strips, and eyes that gleamed without light. Jed gripped the rifle. The woman didn't move. Her bare feet sank into the dirt like roots. Her shoulders never flinched. She spoke a word. Low point old. The figures stopped. One tilted its head, as if recognizing her, or what she once was. Jed couldn't understand the language, but he felt the air change, like the ground itself was listening. The lead figure raised a hand. She stepped forward. Jed said nothing. He didn't ask her what she was doing. He didn't beg her to stay. She looked back at him once, just once, and in her eyes was something not quite sadness, not quite farewell. She placed her hand over her own chest, then turned. The three riders turned with her, vanishing into the trees like smoke swallowed by wind. Jed lowered the rifle, but he didn't go inside. Not yet. 3 days passed, no signs, no messages, no footprints. Jed did the chores like always. He chopped wood, drew water, sat on the porch. Inside, the cabin was still, but not empty. The sage bundle was gone. So was the feather. But her knife still hung by the door. And on the table, beneath a folded piece of deer hide, sat a single stone, smooth, marked with charcoal. A symbol, one he didn't know, but it looked like a path. On the 5th day, the soldiers returned. Not 3 this time. 7. The man with the clean coat wasn't with them. These men wore expressions hard as iron, eyes that didn't look to understand, only enforce. "Where is she?" one asked. Jed didn't answer. "She run?" Still, nothing. They tore the place apart, searched the barn, lifted floorboards, but found only emptiness. "She was seen," one said. "Riders heading west." Jed said, "Then you know where to go." The soldier stepped close. "If we find you lied, Cobb, we'll burn this place down." Jed looked at him, calm as dust. "Then I'll rebuild." They didn't return. Not the soldiers. Not the riders. Not her. Jed rebuilt the coop, patched the roof, rode into town once, bought seed and powder. Nobody asked him questions. Some nodded. One boy pointed at him and whispered to his mother, but she pulled the child away fast. By then, rumors had already grown like weeds. That she was a spirit. That she cursed the land. That Jedediah Cobb had fallen in love with a ghost. He didn't argue with any of it. He didn't speak at all. Weeks later, a stranger came through. A woman. White dress. Boots too fine for travel. Eyes like ash. She found Jed by the riverbed, said she was a missionary, said she'd heard stories, asked if he had a place for lost women. He said no. She asked if he believed in redemption. He didn't answer. Then she asked a different question. "Do you remember her name?" Jed looked out at the water. "I was never given it," he said. The woman smiled sadly. "Then maybe she's still free." Summer broke hard that year. Crops failed, town shrank, but Jed's land held. The seeds she planted bloomed, not many, not large, but alive. Green against dry soil. People noticed. One man from town asked what he did different. Jed just pointed to the ground. "She left something in it," he said. Years later, Jed still lived there, alone, but never quite. He kept the knife by the door, never used it. He sat on the porch each evening, watching the sun fall behind the ridge. Sometimes a shadow would move just past the tree line. Sometimes he'd hear humming, faint, broken, like breath through dry grass. He never called out, never stood. He just listened. Because some things, the important things, are never finished. And the last thing he never said stayed exactly where it belonged. Unspoken.